Welcome to episode number 1, Roadmap to Medicare Coverage. On the left side of the screen is a picture of the Roadmap to Medicare Coverage document that you received during the introduction episode. By now, you should have identified both the Medicare Administrative Contractor, better known as the MAC, who determines what services, procedures, and products are covered in your jurisdiction, and the DME MAC, who determines coverage for products that you order for your Medicare beneficiaries to use at home. Then you should have used the links to locate, print, and read all the LCDs and LCAs that pertain to your work. Now, on the right side of the screen is a picture of a new handout that lists each MAC's LCDs and LCAs pertinent to wound and ulcer management. Using the button below, feel free to download, print, and compare the list of LCDs and LCAs to the coverage documents that you retrieved. Now, please select one of the LCDs that you downloaded. Although each of you are looking at different LCDs, you will quickly see that they are similarly designed. Follow along with me as I describe the major sections of an LCD. First, you will see the title and an identification number for each LCDs. Then you will see the name of the MAC who wrote the LCD, as well as the states where the LCD is applicable. Then you might see an original effective date, which is when the LCD first began. And if it has been revised, you will find a revision effective date. And if it's in a notice and comment period, you will see the start and end date for the comment period. Then you will see the reason why the MAC created the LCD. There will be a description of it. Then you will typically find the covered indications, any limitations, and the medical necessity that is necessary in order to have coverage for the service, procedure, or product. Then, if there are any requirements for the providers who will be covered to do the work, they will be listed. Very often there are definitions that will be on your LCD, and because the MACs are required to follow published evidence when they create an LCD, you will typically find the summary of the evidence. Following that, you'll typically find the covered and non-covered services, procedures, and/or products. Then there will be a bibliography, which will be a list of all the articles that the MAC reviewed. And then there will be a revision history. If this is the first time the LCD is being printed or listed, then indeed you will only find one date. But then if it is revised in future times, the latest revision will be at the top of the table, and all the other older LCDs will be below it. Now, under that, you typically find something called associated documents, and many people miss this, and it really is very important. There will be titles of different documents, and they are hyperlinks. You should open that hyperlink for the articles so that you can get the additional information. Now, please select the billing and coding article that corresponds to the LCD that you just reviewed. As we review the sections of the article, you may find that it often contains more practical information than the corresponding LCD. So follow along with me as I describe the major sections of the LCD. Now, of course, it begins with a title and an ID, and the MAC and the states and the dates that are important. But then it will give you billing and coding guidance. Following that, you'll typically find utilization parameters that may specify how frequently you can do something or how often you can do it, or it might put a limitation on the number of times you may perform the procedure. Then you will find very clear documentation requirements that you should follow and include in your documentation. You will then find covered codes, descriptions, and any coding rules, as well as non-covered codes and descriptions. Now, many times codes require modifiers, and if they do, the modifiers that are required will be listed along with their descriptions and their guidance. And then, of course, we know we have to have a diagnosis that justifies the medical necessity for why we are doing whatever we have chosen to do. And therefore, you will find a list of the ICD-10 codes that are covered, and they may find some guidance for the use of those codes. You will find a typical revision history and the associated documents like we saw with the LCDs. And please note that one of the associated documents for this article will be back to the LCD that pertains to it. Now, after researching your LCDs and LCAs, you should have discovered that your MACs have not written pertinent coverage policies. However, all of the MACs, except for Palmetto GBA, have explicit standard wound care and or debridement LCDs and LCAs. In addition, both DME MACs have surgical dressing LCDs, LCAs, and a standard documentation requirement LCA for all claims submitted to DME MACs. Therefore, these standard wound care coverage guidelines should be your wound and ulcer management playbook at every encounter. Then, if you provide additional advanced care, such as the application of cellular and or tissue-based products for skin wounds, you should also follow those coverage guidelines. Now that you printed your LCDs and LCAs, I highly recommend that you take the time to refine your medical decision making, your documentation, and your electronic healthcare record to comply with the coverage guidelines. Now, before we leave, let's address the 3 most common coverage myths that I hear over and over. First, physicians often tell me, I do not follow the standard wound care guidelines, but I always get paid by my MAC. Well, I always explain that claims are typically processed without reviewing the documentation. However, when a Medicare contractor conducts an audit and reviews the documentation, repayments often occur if the coverage requirements and or coding guidelines were not met. Now, the second myth is that physicians do not have time to read LCDs and LCAs. I always remind physicians that they do not have many pertinent LCDs and LCAs, but the ones they have are their playbook. Just like their favorite football or basketball team's players must take the time to read and learn their playbook, physicians must read and implement the LCDs and LCAs that pertain to their work. And then the last myth sometimes makes me crazy when I'm told that as a physician, I do not have to follow the surgical dressing LCD documentation guidelines. I am not a durable medical equipment supplier. I only order the products from DME suppliers. Well, this is totally incorrect. When physicians order any drugs or medical devices for their patients' use at home, they are responsible for proving and supporting the medical necessity for the items in the patient's medical record. When a DME supplier is audited, the auditor will also review the documentation of the physician who ordered the item. Now, in the next episode, I am going to introduce you to one of my friends, Donna Cartwright. Donna will share pertinent information about reporting accurate ICD-10 codes that reflect the patient's condition and the support the medical necessity for the work that you perform at each encounter. Now, to prepare for episode 2, I recommend that you review the covered diagnoses in the LCAs and LCDs that you have just printed. And as a reminder, we welcome subscribers to submit questions and/or topics that you would like us to address. My email address is kathleenschaum@gmail.com. And when you submit questions and/or topic requests, my reimbursement friends and I will do our best to address those questions and topics in future episodes. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of Reimbursement Readiness, business tips for wound practice that addressed coverage. Coverage is the most important component of reimbursement. Now watch for the release of episode number 2, and I look forward to introducing you to my friend Donna Cartwright real soon.